Hey there, church. All right, I hope you're ready. Grab your beverage of choice. Mine is water this week. And let's sit down and dive into God's Word. We're going to be in Isaiah 23 and 24. Last week we learned about how God judges because He is holy, He is righteous. But we also learned of His incredible plan to unite the nations in worship of Him. He would create within them a spirit of unity. How cool is that? And they would sacrifice, worship, and do/obey what they said they would do and what He says they should do. This, once again, is to draw back to the imagery of chapter 2, if you remember back a couple weeks, where God would draw all men to Himself like a river that runs uphill. Wild. Cool imagery that reflects the supernatural ability of God to break through sin and one day set up His physical kingdom here on earth, where we will delight in Him and live in peace with everyone. Today we're going to dig a little deeper into chapters 23 and 24. I hope you're ready to put on your thinking caps and ditch the snorkeling gear for some tanks, because we're going to dive deep. We're going to be looking at the burden or oracle against Tyre. In chapter 3, a little background information first, though, on the passage. You're going to notice a lot of coastal or water language here. That's because Tyre is on the coast of Israel, okay? And you should see it here in a picture. The city of Tyre falling would have great impact on the known world. They were a huge trading port and had more of a reach and an impact than even the Babylonians. They impacted the entire Mediterranean Sea all the way to the Indian Ocean. Their trade was known throughout the world, and they were prosperous and they were rich. And there's also an old Tyre and a new Tyre. Old Tyre was on the coast. New Tyre pushed off the coast a little bit onto an island that was a couple hundred yards off the coast. Both traded hands of power several times in the Old Testament. Shalmaneser took over Tyre around the same time as the siege of Samaria, as well as being taken over and controlled eventually by Nebuchadnezzar and Alexander the Great. It's an extremely important city in the region. In chapter 23, we're going to see why. They were also the last place that God has not touched in His series of oracles around Judah. The people of Judah will have no one to run to except God when this is all over with. He is taking out their strongholds, their places of refuge. Look to God is the message here. So let's begin by reading the chapter, all right? So we're going to take chapter 23, and we're going to go all the way through it. The burden against Tyre. Wail, you ships of Tarshish, for it is laid waste, so that there is no house, no harbor. From the land of Cyprus it is revealed to them. Be still, you inhabitants of the coastland, you merchants of Sidon, whom those you cross the sea have filled. And on great waters the grain of Shihor, the harvest of the river, is her revenue, and she is a marketplace for the nations. This is a very rich city. Be ashamed, O Sidon, for the sea has spoken, the strength of the sea, saying, I do not labor nor bring forth children, neither do I rear young men, nor bring up virgins. When the report reaches Egypt, they will also be in agony at the report of Tyre. Cross over to Tarshish. Wail, you inhabitants of the coastland. Is your joyous city, whose antiquity is from ancient days, whose feet carried her far off to dwell, who has taken this counsel against Tyre, the crowning city, whose merchants are princes, whose traders are the honorable of the earth? The Lord has purposed it, to bring to dishonor the pride of all glory, to bring into contempt all of the honorable of the earth. Overflow through your land like the river, O daughter of Tarshish. There is no more strength. He stretched out His hand over the sea. He took the kingdoms. The Lord has given a commandment against Canaan to destroy its strongholds. And He said, you will rejoice no more, O you oppressed virgin, daughter of Sidon. Arise, cross over to Cyprus. There also you will have no rest. Behold, the land of the Chaldeans, this people which was not, Assyria founded it for the wild beasts of the desert. They're going to take over. They set up its towers, they raised up its palaces, and brought it to ruin. Wail, you ships of Tarshish, for your strength is laid waste. Now it shall come to pass in that day that Tyre will be forgotten 70 years, according to the days of one king. At the end of 70 years, it will happen to Tyre as in the song of the harlot. Take a harp, go about the city, you forgotten harlot. Make sweet melody, sing many songs, that you may be remembered. And it shall be at the end of 70 years that the Lord will deal with Tyre. She will return to her hire and commit fornication with all the kingdoms of the world on the face of the earth. Her gain and her pay, though, will be set apart for the Lord. It will not be treasured nor laid up, for her grain will be for those who dwell before the Lord, to eat sufficiently and for fine clothing. How cool is that? That's quite a contrast there of what happens. So we have, wail, you ships of Tarshish. Verse 1. It's used to start and end the section of verses 1 through 14. First off, the ships of Tarshish were world-renowned for being extremely good ships and for carrying the world's goods at this time overseas. This goes to show why news of Tyre being destroyed is carried throughout the world. And the people everywhere are going to be sad. Verse 6 tells the people they need to leave and find a way to Tarshish. Okay, where's that? Well, in church, we've been studying the story of Jonah. Jonah, when finding out God's will for his life, runs to Tarshish. Or he tries. He gets on a ship bound for Tarshish. The exact location of Tarshish, though, is debatable. Some think it's in Asia Minor. Some think it's all the way west of the Mediterranean in Spain, on that southern coast there of the Iberian Peninsula. There's evidence for both, but the idea is that Jonah was running away from God's will for his life, and Tarshish represents going away as far as possible. It's a visual that he is going as far as physically possible, especially if it was on the coast of Spain. Verses 8 through 10 show us exactly why this is happening. The Lord of hosts has purposed it to bring dishonor to the pride of all glory. God mentions taking down pride 6 places in Isaiah up to this point. In chapter 2, chapter 5, and chapter 10. So let's learn from this, right? Don't take your pride lightly. Allow God to crush it wherever it is found in your life. Give up everything to God. Hold nothing back. See, Judah was not necessarily friendly toward Tyre. This is addressed to Judah. They weren't exactly friendly to Tyre, but it's a lament given to them about Tyre. Why? Well, one commentator thinks that they're giving the lament the same type of genre as the one in chapters 13 and 14 about Babylon. It's almost like a satire, a satirical lament. It's interesting because it carries the idea as if I wrote a lament today about the fall of a terrorist organization. Yeah, that wouldn't make any sense. It's completely contrary to what these people would actually be thinking. It's a contradiction of thought. The presence of contradictions, anomalies, and 18 different verbal markers throughout this chapter give the idea that this is truly a burden. It's an oracle, right? And it's a lament. But Judah may not take it seriously. However, they need to understand it to understand that God will judge pride. So they need to see that anywhere he finds it. Tyre is a city far away and a prosperous and rich people. But they're going to fall, and they're going to fall because of their pride. There's a lesson for the people of Judah to learn here. So we keep going. Verses 11 through 14 here continues that thought and shows the complete destruction that's going to take place. He also mentions the destruction of Babylon in verse 13. So if the Chaldean Empire can be completely crushed, Tyre doesn't stand much of a chance here. And the lament ends the same way it started. Wail, O you ships of Tarshish. So to finish the chapter, though, to get to verse 15 here, This is a very unique part of the chapter. It's about how Tyre is going to be forgotten. But he uses a play on words here, comparing them to a harlot who has gone out of business, as it were, and is completely forgotten. Tyre is not a harlot in this situation, but Isaiah compares them to one that is forgotten. Thank God for his mercy and grace, though, because they don't stay that way. You look at verses 17 and 18, and at the end of 70 years, they're going to be restored. All international trade is going to start happening again, but the business is going to be used for God's glory and for the people of God. Now, we understand that Judah should not be running to the other nations of the earth for help. We get that. They cannot depend on the powerful Assyrians, the wise Egyptians, or the wealthy Tyre. For God is in charge of them all, and therefore pride is punished, because pride leads the people to believe that they could live their lives independent of the one who made them. They may not have said that out loud, their defiance of God, but the way in which they lived their lives declared it. That God did not deserve their respect, their love, or their desire. Are we like that today? I know I can be. My pride makes me feel like I don't need God. And as the psalmist says in Psalm 42, as the deer pants for the water, so my soul longs for you. That's how we should be. That right there is how we should be. Longing for God. Our soul longs for God. It is necessary to our existence. And by the people of Tyre having pride and thinking they can rely on themselves and their riches, they might not be in defiance of God outwardly, but they are by their actions. So, we're going to end today with chapter 24. This is a wild chapter. It actually goes well with chapters 25 through 27, but we're only going to get through 24 today. We'll cover 25 to 27 next week. So, keep this in mind. First, you should note that there's a series of the series of burdens or oracles. It's over. This starts a whole new section of writing. It's important because it means that what we're about to read is a descriptive passage that implies not necessarily a burden, but facts that are to be observed. And it's not a lament. It's not a burden for a specific people. These chapters are more universal in their nature. However, this chapter may be looked at as bleak, just a forewarning. You might be like, But is it hopeful or is it bleak? Let's find out. So, we're going to start by reading chapter 24, verses 1 through 5. Behold, the Lord makes the earth empty and makes it waste, distorts its surface and scatters abroad its inhabitants. And it shall be, as with the people, so with the priest, as with the servant, so with his master, as with the maid, so with her mistress, as with the buyer, so with the seller, as with the lender, so with the borrower, as with the creditor, so with the debtor. The land shall be entirely emptied and utterly plundered, for the Lord has spoken this word. The earth mourns and fades away. The world languishes and fades away. The haughty people of the earth languish. The earth is also defiled under its inhabitants, the earth, because they have transgressed the laws, changed the ordinance, broken the everlasting covenant. Once again, I warn you, it may seem bleak. So the whole earth is in view now, though. Before God judged individual nations and cities, as we saw with Tyre, and now Isaiah says the whole earth is in view here. This is the land, which we just read about, as well as the creatures and the people. Everything that was affected by the fall. He starts with behold, though. Verse 1, right? Behold, the Lord makes the earth empty. It's like saying, hey, come here. Listen to me. Listen to this. I got a good one for you. That's what behold means. And so verse 1 and verse 3 emphasize the land being completely empty, wiped out. Verse 2 implies that no matter your class, your job, your status, all is going to fall. All are going to fall under this scattering and this emptying. No one can escape because God is equal opportunity here. But God gives a strong reason for the scattering and the emptying of verse 5. Look at the reasons. The earth is also defiled under its inhabitants because they have transgressed the law, changed the ordinance, and broken the everlasting covenant. The sin of the people have forsaken the law of God. In fact, they've transgressed it. That means not only did they transgress it, they saw it, they saw the line, the boundary, and they hopped over it. They took no regard for the law of God. It's as if they saw a fence guarding a property, and they walked right up to it, cut right through it, and walked through it. Or they jumped over it. Or they dug under it. However you want to look at it, they completely disregarded the laws of God, just like you disregarded that fence when you tried to cross it. The people have forsaken the law of God. In fact, not only did they transgress it, but they changed the ordinance here. It means hikak, okay, in Hebrew. Literally made the law what they wanted it to be. Do we hear that today? Sounds like today. And lastly, they just ignored the covenants that God provided to them, which is a slap in the face of God because he provided the covenants, he entered into the covenants, he kept the covenants, and the people just treated them as insignificant. This really is how we are to treat God, is how we treat God with contempt. That he would save us, that he would sacrifice himself for us. And we just treat his work, his promises, his mission as nothing. Negligible, even, with the impact on our lives. Living as if his sacrifice means nothing to us. And it doesn't make an impact on the life of us or the people around us. So once again, you could be like the people of Tyre here, where you completely disregard the laws of God just by your life. It's not like you're openly against God, but the way you live says you're against God. Or you could be the people like here of the earth who make the laws whatever they want to be and completely disregard the covenant that God has entered into with you. Whew, this is some powerful stuff, man. So verse 6 starts with therefore, which makes sense after reading that, right? Therefore the curse has devoured the earth, and those who dwell in it are desolate. Therefore the inhabitants of the earth are burned, and few men are left. That's a transitional verse, because now we're going to look at 7 through 12, where it's a poem. It's about 45 words in Hebrew, and it can be laid out in 15 lines of 3 words, okay? The effects of the words this way, and how cool this is in Hebrew, is that the effects of having those lines of 3 words, boom, 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 it's like the author is just slamming home the message 15 times. It's as if they're destroying a city with a hammer one at a time. It's poetry that's laid out in such a manner that it has a metaphorical effect of an actual event that you can see lived out in history. It's pretty sweet. It's creative. But verse 7 through 12, we're going to see here, show that joy is gone, okay? Joy is gone, satisfaction's gone, security is gone. The self-gratifying lifestyle of people is brought up in sharp contrast to their downfall. They're self-gratifying. This is what the people are. It's what we are today. Everything the people knew as comfort and joy was going to be taken away. Of interesting note, though, is verse 10, where it says, the city of confusion, chaos, or ruin is left desolate. Okay, verse 10, the city of confusion is broken down. Every house is shut up so that no one may go in. The word for confusion here is the word tohu in Hebrew, which Moses used in Genesis 1, verse 2. The earth was without form and void. It was formless, tohu. This world that Isaiah is describing here is going to return to a formless void. if the people continue without God. That's the essence of what the world was before God entered it, and it would be the same way without God now. Nothing would satisfy them. Nothing would bring them joy. Sure, they may think they're having joy, I'll give you that, and that life is good. But even with those things, the things described here in the passage, you think you have this stuff, your life is void and formless, essentially, is what the author's saying here. Those items, those riches, they don't give purpose. They don't give security. And they can't take the place of God. So that is huge. And I hope you understand that. The things of this life that are cheap, that are imitations of what God provides, they'll never satisfy. So we have two short sections here that end the chapter. The first one is actually a song. Why? Because songs are easy to remember. It's something the people can remember going forward. So it's verse 13 through 16. Let's read it. When it shall be thus in the midst of the land among the people, it shall be like the shaking of an olive tree, like the gleaning of grapes when the vintage is done. They shall lift up their voice, they shall sing for the majesty of the Lord, they shall cry aloud from the sea. Therefore glorify the Lord in the dawning light, the name of the Lord God of Israel in the coastlands of the sea. From the ends of the earth we have heard songs. Glory to the righteous. But I said, I am ruined. Ruined. Woe to me! The treacherous dealers have dealt treacherously. Indeed, the treacherous dealers have dealt very treacherously. This song is to be in complete contrast to the preceding verses. Note, it is for the whole earth. So like when the olive trees or the grapevines are beaten to get everything out, they will shout for joy. As in verse 11, here it says, there is a cry for wine in the streets. All joy is darkened. All the merry-hearted sigh. Now the joy is back, but this time the joy will be in the Lord. It will be for the Lord from the ends of the earth to the glory of the righteous one. And Isaiah ends the passage with judgment, future judgment though. I asked at the beginning of this chapter, did you think it was hopeful or was it bleak? We're going to look at some judgment here, but this is future. Let's see. Some would state that this is the apocalypse of Isaiah because it pictures the end of days. It's very similar to Revelation. So let's read verses 17 through 23. Fear and the pit and the snare are upon you, O inhabitant of the earth. And it shall be that he who flees from the noise of the fear shall fall into the pit, and he who comes up from the midst of the pit shall be caught in a snare. For the windows from on high are open, and the foundations of the earth are shaken. The earth is violently broken. The earth is split open. The earth is shaken exceedingly. The earth shall reel to and fro like a drunkard, shall totter like a hut. Its transgression shall be heavy upon it, and it will fall and not rise again. It shall come to pass in that day that the Lord will punish on high the host of the exalted ones, and on the earth the kings of the earth. They will be scattered, as prisoners are gathered in the pit, and will be shut up in the prison. And after many days they will be punished. Then the moon will be disgraced, and the sun will be ashamed, for the Lord of hosts will reign on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem. This pictures Revelation's description of the end times really closely. And it's a cool picture of what Isaiah sees as happening in the future. So Isaiah sees God on his throne high and lifted up in chapter 6, if you remember that, right? As God was/is. He sees the elders. He sees heaven. And here he gets a glimpse of the future. The millennium kingdom of God, when God will reign physically in Jerusalem, surrounded by his elders who are worshiping him as Revelation 4:10 and Revelation 5:8 through 14 say. So this is a really cool transition here. So if you want to read Revelation 4, go ahead and pause the video and turn there. Revelation 4, verse 10. Actually, I'm reading 9 through 11. Whenever the living creatures give glory, honor, and thanks to him who sits on the throne and who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before him who sits on the throne and worship him who lives forever and ever. They lay their crowns down before the throne and say, "You are worthy, our God and Lord, to receive glory and honor and power. For you created all things, and by your will they were created and have their being." And then Revelation 5, verses 8 through 10. And when he had taken it, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb. Each one had a harp, and they were holding golden bowls of incense, which are the prayers of God's people. And they sang a new song, saying, "You are worthy to take the scroll and open its seals, because you were slain. And with your blood you purchased for God persons from every tribe and language and people and nation. You have made them to be a kingdom and priests to serve our God, and they will reign on the earth." That's pretty awesome. So, I hope you enjoyed this study as much as I did today. From the downfall of Tyre, who was rich and proud, and in whom God did not want Judah to trust. Understand that. He does not want them to trust anyone else in the world. Trust God. And then to their restoration, to Tyre's restoration, 70 years later, where they would use their riches to serve God. How cool is that? And then the judgment on the earth, but inevitable destruction of evil. That's cool. And the establishment of God on a throne in Jerusalem as king. Physically reigning here on earth for the first time. That's pretty cool, and we're going to get to see it. We will see it. I still think, that's just incredible to me. I can't wait for that day. But I love you, church, and I will see you next week.